In this video, I'm going to talk about APA documentation. Now, the thing you have to know about APA is that there are a lot of rules when it comes to how to properly document sources. Much more rules than there are with MLA. So it's really a good idea to have some notes with you whenever you're doing an APA paper, and definitely have it checked by a tutor or somebody else to ensure the documentation is done properly, because it can be really easy to mess up an APA paper. First of all, you know that at the end of an MLA paper, you have what's called the works cited, where you have your sources listed at the end. And then when you're writing your paper, you have your in-text citations whenever you refer to a source. So if I were to paraphrase something, I have my in-text citation in my sentence, which matches the documentation on the works cited at the end. APA does the same thing. You have to document whether you are doing a paraphrase sentence, if you reworded it in your own words, or if you quote it. But the method is actually different depending on if you quote or if you paraphrase. Now, the first thing I want to remind you of is that when you are searching in the database and when you find a source that you want to use, that you want to get the APA citation for that source. So in the database, whether you're in the Gale one or the opposing viewpoints, you want to look for the citation tool. Okay, it could be in a different spot on the page depending on which database you're in. In Gale, it's on the right side. And then when you click on it, when you did your art essay, you had it on the MLA 8th edition, you would have copy pasted this. But since this is an APA paper, we have to change the format to APA, and then we have to copy paste this citation instead. So you want to save your APA citation, which you'll put onto your references page when you eventually develop your document. Now, as you know, this is going to go at the end of your paper. In MLA, that was called the works cited page at the very end. In APA, it's the references page. And when you're using this information in your essay, you have to then cite it. You can either take the information you read and put in your own words, which is paraphrased, and then you document it at the end. Or if you really like the quote and you really can't reword it, maybe it's a string of statistics and you can't manipulate those numbers, so you just have to quote it in that sense, then you have to quote word for word with the quotes around it to show that you haven't changed anything, and then you still have to document it. So that process is the same. Whether you paraphrase or quote, you still have to note which source you're using, where it comes from, and it'll match whatever is on your references page in the APA form. However, with APA, there are more rules than with MLA. In MLA, what you put in the citation is the same, whether you paraphrase it or quoted it. In APA, it's different if you paraphrase it versus if you quote it. And it also depends on the number of authors that are present in the source. So this particular source has one author, which is super easy. So when you are doing a source with only one author, if you paraphrase it in your own words, you just go with the last name of the author. And you put a comma and you provide the year it was published, which will always be the second thing in the source. So in APA, it goes author's name, last name, comma, first initial, in this case a first and middle initial, and then it goes year. You don't put full first names when you're doing a citation, when you're creating a citation in APA. So if I take some information written by Bert in this Encyclopedia of Homelessness, Volume 1, then if I put in my own words, all I have to do is give the last name of the author, if there's one author, and then the year. However, if I word for word quote it, and I've got my quotes around it and I haven't changed a thing, I have to go a step further. I go name, year, and then I have to give the page number that it was on. So if you do a word-for-word quote, you then must provide the exact location of that quote. However, if the source doesn't give me a page number, maybe it's just a whole series of text on a page, and there are no page numbers present. If there's no page numbers present, then I have to give the name, the year, and then the paragraph number instead. So if you paraphrase it in your own words, you just go the name and the year. If you quote it, you must give location, which is page or paragraph number. Now, what if instead of one author, there are two? So all I did was modify this original one just to give you an example. So I added an author to this source, okay? But if there are two authors, then you have to actually represent both authors every time you use the source. So once again, if I paraphrase in my own words, I must give the name, in this case names, there are two authors. So Bert, the and sign, the ampersand, and Travis, comma, and then the year. I put in my own words, so I don't have to provide location. But if there are two authors, I have to give both authors every single time I use the source. If it's a word-for-word quote, both authors, and then if there's a page number, I give the page number. If it's a word-for-word quote, and there are no page numbers, then I have to provide the paragraph number instead. So that's for two authors. What if there are exactly 3, 4, or 5 authors on the source? This is probably starting to sound a little crazy to you, but this is the rule. If your source has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, or 5 authors listed in the documentation, then you have to provide the first time you use this source, all of them. This citation is going to be really long, but that's okay. That's the way they want it. That's the way you do it. So let's say I have 3, 4, or 5 authors represented on my source. So if I put in my own words, yep, I put down all of them, 3, 4, or 5. You put all of them in the in-text citation, and that's for my own words. Then, and you're probably getting the hang of this by now, so let's just copy paste this. That's a lot of authors. If it's a word-for-word quote, I must provide the page number, or, as you know, the paragraph number. Now, that's if I use it once. Let's say I'm writing this source. Oops, let me fix that one. There we go. Let's say I'm using this source, and I used it inside of my first paragraph, okay, of my essay. Let's say I use it somewhere in my essay one time, in one paragraph. So in paragraph 1 of my paper, paraphrase in my own words, Bert, Travis, Johnson, Douglas, and Law, 2004. If there are 3, 4, or 5 authors, the first time you use this source, you've got to include all 3, 4, or 5 of them. If you use the same source again a second time somewhere else in the paper, like I went from paragraph 1, I used the source one time, then I was writing paragraph 2, I want to use the same source again. If I use it again later, I don't have to put all of the authors because I've done it once already. I only have to put the first one, and then I do an abbreviation, ETAL, and then I can just provide the year at that point. Or if it's a quote, I still have to provide location, either page or paragraph number. So if it's 3, 4, or 5 authors, the first time you use the source, you have to provide all of them, all 3, 4, or 5. The year, and then if it's a quote, page or paragraph number. If I decide to use the same source again later on in my paper, I use it a second time. I've already done all the work the first time, so then I get to abbreviate. I just provide the first name, the first last name on the list, ETAL, which is an abbreviation for and the rest, and then the year, or if it's a quote, page or paragraph number. What if there are 6 or more authors for the source? And you might think, how can there be that many authors? In a sciences paper, that is very possible. Because when you think about it, a lot of the sciences papers are studies. And studies take a lot of participants in order to make the study valid. I can't conduct a study on bullying with only one school as my sample and 10 students. Those 10 students is just not a large enough sample to say that this sample represents the entire United States and all students who are bullied. It's just not big enough. I would have to get multiple schools. I'd have to interview thousands of students to get a really good sample on bullying statistics. And so as one scientist, that would take me forever to do. So what I would do is I would grab a bunch of my scientist buddies and say, hey guys, we're all going to do the study together. Each of us is going to do a different school. Each of you are going to sample this many students. And then in 1 year, we're going to come back together, put all our data together, and we're going to write up the report. And therefore, all 20 of our names are going to be placed on the document as the authors at that point. So it is totally possible to have 6 or more authors on a scientific document. If there are 6 or more, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can actually list up to 7. At that point, they start putting dots at the end. But if there are 6 or more authors on the document for authors, in the citation, you get to immediately abbreviate. So all I have to do is put the first one, Bert, ETAL, which means there are way more than just Bert involved in this study, and then the year, if I paraphrase it in my own words. If it's a direct quote, ETAL, Bert ETAL, 2004, page number. And then if there are no page numbers, always go page numbers first. But if there are no page numbers, then you go paragraph number. Like that. What if there are no authors? For instance, I look at the beginning of my citation I have from the database. There are no authors here. It's just the title in quotes followed by the year. So if there are no authors, you actually go with the same sort of method you do with MLA. You grab the beginning of the title, the first 1, 2, or 3 words at the most. Again, you only go up to a major word. So for instance, this by itself, homelessness, is a major word. So I can just stop with 1. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll grab the title, up to the first 3 words max, but again, you stop at a major word or phrase, and then in the citation, you do put it in quotes to show that this word is a part of a title and not a person's name, comma, and then the year. Once again, if it's a word-for-word quote, I can't just give the title and the year. I have to give a location. If there are no page numbers present, which is always what I'm going to use first, if there are no page numbers, then it's paragraph number. There we go. Okay, so that's how you deal with a situation where there are no authors. Another thing to note is that if there is no date on the source, like if it's a title without a date, without a year of publication, if you're working on a website, that's very possible. If there's no author or no date, for instance, or if there's an author but no date, either way, if the year of publication is ever missing, then in the year section, you just put N period, D period, which indicates there was no date present. And the same thing goes inside the in-text citations. So I've got the title here because there's no author. So homelessness, comma, no date. That's in my own words. If there is a direct quote, word for word, I've got my title, no date, the page number, or the paragraph number. Now, this is just the basics when it comes to in-text citations. The rules go even further than that, depending on the different type of situation you might be in at the time. So if you encounter a source where you're really not sure how to document it, that's when you want to ask for help. Ask your instructor, email me, ask me your questions about documentation, ask a tutor for some help. Always have somebody check your documentation, because when there are just this many rules for a citation style, such as APA, it's really easy to mess this up. And you don't want to get deductions. You certainly don't want to get hit for a plagiarism issue, which can happen if you don't document correctly. So in order to make sure everything is correct, always get it checked by somebody first. Okay?